Hello and welcome to the Rearview. I'm Jacob Koshy,
And I'm Shobhana Nair.
and we have a cracker of story today, isn't it, Shobhana?
Absolutely, Jake. So far we have talked about the triumphs and tragedies of great scientists. We've discussed events like reintroduction of cheetahs to India and the pursuit of cracking the mystery of the monsoon. What we haven't discussed is a scandal. Now, science is not always about good men and women in pursuit of truth. Like every human enterprise, it also has a share of ambitious and conniving charlatans. Today, we bring you one of the greatest scandals of the 20th century in Indian and arguably world scientific history. A deception so vast it shook the foundations of paleontology and battered trust in Indian science. And all this is not too far from where we sit, Jacob, in Chandigarh. This is the story of the great Himalayan hoax and the man behind it, geologist Vishwajit Gupta. Buckle up because this tale is a wild ride through ambition, fraud, and an abuse of the process that holds science together.
So thrilled about some crime fiction over here.
Yes.
Anyway, so let's set the stage. It's the 1960s, and Vishwajit Gupta is a young, ambitious geologist at Panjab University in Chandigarh. The Himalayas, the world's most majestic mountain range, if I may argue, is his playground. Now, this is a region of immense geological interest. It's a place where the Indian subcontinent collided into Asia around 55 million years ago. These mountain ranges, whose peaks were once at the bottom of the sea, are a treasure trove of fossils that provide clues into a long chain of evolution, particularly how single celled organisms became multicellular, how vertebrates evolved. In the late 60s and 70s, it was a pursuit of finds like these that inspired aspiring paleontologists and geologists.
Jacob, before you get into the science of it, please describe Gupta for me. Paint a picture.
So unfortunately, Shobhana, he's not like the kind of people you like, the aquiline Vikram Sarabhai and all those lovely, suave, dapper gentlemen.
Yeah,
But it's, I mean, I've seen his Wikipedia page. So he is described as having a shiny, round face, but he has a penchant for big cigars and flamboyant coats with ermine collars, very well traveled, and he really likes having a good time and hanging out with the very heat. So, Gupta is armed with a master's degree and a PhD under the mentorship of renowned geologist Mulk Raj Sani, and he forayed almost frenetically into the world of paleontology. He and Sani published the first reports of fossils in 1964, so he's just 22, with announcing the discovery of graptolites, which are a class of invertebrate marine fossils. They published this in two papers in the prestigious journal Nature, which is a big, big deal. I mean, somebody that in their 20s getting into Nature is a big one. He published on fossil assemblage in two papers in Current Science and one in the Journal of the Paleontological Society of India. In 1966, Punjab University awarded him a PhD for his thesis called Paleontology, Stratigraphy and Structure of the Paleozoic Rocks of the area southeast of Srinagar. That's a mouthful, but this man is determined to make his mark. And boy, Ghazi, between 1966 and 89, he publishes over 450 research papers, 5 books. And that's an astonishing output by any standard, even today at any time. And it earns him the title of India's most celebrated fossil scientist. His work is very focused on the fossil record of the Himalayas, and some of his discoveries seemed groundbreaking.
In 1967, he literally summited the very peak of scientific publishing when he co authors a paper in the prestigious journal Nature at the age of 25, claiming to have found conodonts, tiny tooth like microfossils of ancient marine animals in the Himalayas. This is a first for India and it catapults Gupta to international fame. Gupta's work was electrifying for the time. Conodonts are critical for dating geological strata, and finding them in the Himalayas suggest a richer and a more complex fossil record than anyone had imagined. He was collaborating with global heavyweights, scientists like Frank H.T. Rhodes and R.L. Austin, and his papers were shaping how we understood the region's geological history. And Gupta's star keeps rising. By 1972, Punjab University names him director of the Institute of Paleontology.
Historical, just 30 years in director.
Imagine, yeah. He was the youngest director in the institution's history. He's churning out papers, he's mentoring students, he's presenting at conferences worldwide. He collaborates with over 120 scientists, lending his work an air of unimpeachable credibility. But here's the thing about science, it thrives on trust. And Gupta, it turns out, is about to betray that trust in a way no one could have predicted.
Plot tickets. So the first cracks in Gupta's facade appears in the late 70s. Indian geologists like S.P. Srikantia, H.N. Kapoor, and S.K. Shah, they begin raising doubts about his findings. They notice inconsistencies. Fossils that don't match the geological settings Gupta claims that they are from. In 1981, P.N. Agrawal challenges Gupta's Conodont discoveries in the Journal of the Paleontological Society of India. He pointed out that these fossils seem suspiciously similar to those found elsewhere, like in New York or Morocco. But these early warnings are largely ignored because he's a star, his reputation is too big, his network is too powerful. And this is all until an Australian geologist come paleontologist, the wonderfully named John Talent, appears on the scene.
Yeah, John Talent was a geologist and paleontologist at the Macquarie University with a deep interest in Devonian geology. That's the eon from about 450 million years ago when the first land animals started to evolve. He had been working in the Himalayas himself and had followed Gupta's work for years. But something didn't add up. The fossils Gupta reported, like the ammonoids and conodonts, were oddly identical to specimens from completely different parts of the world. Talent started digging, and what he found was jaw dropping. Talent's suspicions grew through 1970s and 1980s. In 1986, Talent uncovers a damning clue. Ammonoid fossils Gupta claimed were from Himalayas bore the shiny reddish black weathering typical of a Moroccan specimen, not the frost weathered fossil you'd expect from a Himalayan site. He even finds a similar fossil for sale in a Paris shop.
Shop.
Can you imagine? I mean, I'm going to Paris not to buy scarves or perfumes, but to buy a fossil. Yeah. Then Talent's colleague Glenn Brock discovers that Gupta's doctoral thesis from 1966 contains images lifted directly from 20th century reports by British geologist Frederick Richard Cooper Reid. Now, Brock had worked closely with Talent to unveil Gupta's deception. He found that not just they had he had taken pictures of previous paleontologists work, he had when he they visited the sites that Gupta had mentioned in his papers, they found that either they were too vague, inaccessible, or actually outright fictitious. Some locations were in conflict zones, impossible for foreign scientists to verify, and Gupta cleverly cited Indian government restrictions on detailed maps as a reason for his vague coordinates, claiming it's a matter of national security.
So the evidence is mounting, and Talent knows he needs to go public. Now, this is a very dangerous line that, in the world of scientists and geologists actually trade, because especially when they want to accuse fellow scientists of fraud, and because it does them no particular service per se, and it is just fraught with danger. What if you're called out wrong? But he takes the call. In 1987, at the International Symposium on the Devonian System in Calgary, Canada, he drops a bombshell. With Gupta in the audience, Talent presents slides comparing Gupta's Himalayan fossils to the identical specimens from Morocco and New York that you mentioned. The room is stunned. And here, Shobna, there's this very interesting interview that John Talent had done on a show called What Happens to Whistleblowers from September 2005. It's a brilliant radio show. And I'm going to, recite some bits from, this conversation. So John Talent goes to this conference in Calgary, makes a presentation there, and he included material from Morocco that was in one of the plates in a paper by Gupta. And he was able to show this simultaneously on the screen. So the fossils in the two presentations, you may imagine this whole room of distinguished paleontologists, geologists, they're all sitting there. And two of these fossils look exactly the same. And Gupta was in the front row. And one of Talent's colleagues, as he recounts, jumped up and said, "Oh, well, how will you explain having exactly the same fossils in two localities 600 kilometers apart? If that ain't a miracle, I don't know what is." And I love the reaction after that. Gupta stopped. This is all in Talent's words, by the way. Gupta stormed out of the room and he came back waving his fists and obviously wanted to punch me up at the crowd. There were about 250 folks there. They just closed and then he couldn't get near me. I mean, this is like a top.
Can you imagine? I mean,
Punjabi uncle in New York.
Jacob, in your life, you've been covering science for so long. It's one of the most staid, beats.
Paleontology, like super boring.
Exactly. I mean, in any of the seminars, have you ever witnessed something like this?
Absolutely. I could take a time machine and go back to that moment when Gupta wants to punch another scientist. Anyway, he did this 3 times. I mean, imagine, he charged one, was pushed back, charged again, pushed back. And then he demanded from the organizers a list of everyone that was at the meeting. And he demanded from that Talent give him a copy of the manuscript. And fortunately, the director of the Senckenberg Museum in Frankfurt offered to publish it. And this is how Nature, the big journal, I mean, the original Nature that had crowned Gupta as a star, and Nature is still, of course, the world's biggest journal. Somehow, news got around to them, obviously with all this fist pumping, and they commissioned a 3-page paper for Talent, commenting on the significance of this massive exercise in academic fraud. And Talent found that it was 7 books and 458 publications. Now, were all of these frauds? I mean, Talent says some were spurious from end to end. And say this so well. It seems as though when he had something that had been halfway decent, he rose to the challenge of polluting it in some way or the others. So apparently, there were 126 co-authors gone by this enterprise over 28 years. So, what happened to Talent after this? I mean, was he feted as this shining hero in the world of paleontology? He says he didn't have particularly dire consequences, but he just got a few death threats.
That's all. Very minor.
And there were people in India who were hurt by it.
Okay. Jacob, but what Gupta did is not without precedent. It is not as if, let's not malign all Indian scientists, because Gupta had able predecessors, and in fact, a far more able predecessor, the great Piltdown Man hoax. Now, this is one of the most infamous scientific frauds that misled anthropologists for over 50 years by presenting a fabricated missing links between apes and humans. In 1912, Charles Dawson, a local solicitor in England, and also an amateur archaeologist, claimed to have found skull fragments, a jawbone, and flint tools in a gravel pit near Piltdown, East Sussex, England. And it is very interesting. He claimed that one day he was just or going for a walk, and he happened to see some workers working on at a ditch. Yeah, and he just sort of peeped in, and he thought this must be interesting, and then he kept going back to it, and there it was.
Quite well versed as an architect. He knew what to do.
Yeah, he had, in fact, he had a lot of he had discoveries, and he had his connections with the museums, and he was a well sort of connected part-time archaeologist.
Practice law is
I think law was just to earn a
side
living.
gig, a side gig.
No, I think his main love was archaeology, and law was just to earn, to pay the bills. He presented these to Arthur Smith Woodward, the keeper of geology at the British Natural History Museum. The remains were named Dawson's Dawn Man, and they were hailed as a transitional fossil combining a human-like cranium with an ape-like jaw, suggesting an early human ancestor with a large brain, dated to about 500,000 years ago. Yeah, and the British press went wild. Okay, I mean, the British were trying to establish, I mean, they were colonizing the world, but here was the clear evidence that they were the sort of
Human species in its
all its glory,
form
yeah, was
originated in
in England, and that too in Sussex, of all the places. So, now Charles Darwin, in his Descent of Man, had speculated that humans and apes had a common evolutionary ancestor, following which there was always a desire to find proverbial missing link. Yeah, I mean, that's another episode we must do. No, or fossils of some kind of ape man that showed transitionary characteristics between apes and modern human.
most of the major humanoid fossils, like, suggesting like Neanderthal man or Cro-Magnon, Java man, etc., they were all being found outside of England. Also, race theory was very much entrenched in scientific circles. I mean, you had eugenics societies. It was polite and scientific to talk about the European whites being at the top of human evolution.
Can I just interrupt and tell you one small side story? Eugenics is, in fact, also responsible for the first census of India. It started, but that's a different story, and we will take it up later.
Absolutely. So this race theory is very much entrenched, and as you said, there was this latent urge to find ancient human or humanoid fossils in England. I mean, first complete dinosaur fossils had been found in Surrey. England was leading in the world in terms of such kind of paleontological and geological discoveries. So wouldn't it be nice to find proof of, big brain,
And
two-legged modern man?
Yeah, very convenient also at
Absolutely.
that.
And it's this anxiety that Dawson capitalized on. So, like a mashup of a great, hip hop track, he stitched together a cranium from a modern human, obviously likely medieval, like from the 15th or 14th century. He stained it to make it appear ancient. So this is where all his loyalty talents go, I guess. The lower jaw was from an orangutan with teeth filed to mimic human wear and tear and chemically treated to match the skull's color. Associated animal bones, example, an elephant here, a rhinoceros there, and flint tools were planted. Apparently, one of those the bones was shaped like a cricket bat. Again, it's more England. Humanity evolved playing cricket in England. Anyway, so these flint tools were planted and also very carefully stained to suggest a prehistoric site. The jaw's articulation point, where it connects, was broken, and that prevents scrutiny of its mismatch with the skull. They were treated with iron salts and chromic acid to fake age. So Dawson and Woodward announced the find at the Geological Society of London in December 1912, reconstructing a skull that aligned with expectations of an ape-human hybrid. As you said, the papers went wild. A sleepy English village was the cradle of humanity. They called it the first Englishman.
There again, I will interrupt, because at that point a few stray voices said, how do we know it's a man's skull, could be a woman's also, and there was this, there was this side story also running alongside. But yeah, and Jacob, Piltdown, the conspiracy of Piltdown Man, as we would know. Of course, all this was only decisively proved many years after Dawson died, who, on his deathbed in 1916, had the satisfaction of being feted as a legendary discoverer of important fossils. He even brought up another skull, saying that this is the second Piltdown Man before his death. And while there were always critics who doubted the veracity of Dawson and Woodward's claim, it took 4 decades nearly, and the advent of modern electron scanning techniques and chemical analysis to decisively prove that Piltdown fossils were a fraud. And while yeah, while Dawson died, poor man Woodward actually was shamed beyond. He couldn't. He kept going back to the so-called site, and much like Gupta, Dawson also kept it very vague, as in where he had, which ditch he had found it. There were no further digs done in the ditch.
And he announced the fines a full 4 years after they have discussed. There's no way we can get all those workers.
Exactly. There was no evidence justifying Dawson's discovery, and yet Woodward was blamed that he did not question, and he kept going back in search of another pill down, just so that he can salvage what the tattered remains of his own, um, you know uh, and the other interesting angle to the whole story is that, because the deception was unveiled only 40 years later, after Dawson's death, the questions were raised: did Dawson do all of that alone? Did he stay in the skull and file down the teeth all by himself, or was did he have a co-conspirator?
Accomplice.
Yes, and imagine who is argued. I mean, who are the who are all on the list.
I know what a bet, but you should reveal that.
Yes, because I'm so excited, and that is why I've been excited about this story. One of the co-conspirators that many believe helped Dawson was Arthur Conan Doyle.
Oh my god.
Yes, the man.
The Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes.
Creator of this greatest sleuth in human history.
Yeah, but of course, like all good conspiracies, unfortunately, it was
Also because he had written The Lost World
Yeah,
around that time.
yeah.
And Lost World had a lot of links to
And in the Lost
Missing
World,
Links and
also,
Eight Man.
the protagonist is a journalist, by
Oh,
the
really?
way. Yeah.
There's our journalist of fraternity again.
Yes.
And there's also, a French priest and philosopher called Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And if interestingly, John Talent, as a all-round expert, was known as an expert on Chardin.
Oh.
Now, is this why Gupta's finds triggered that instinct within John Talent that, maybe there's some Chardin, Piltdowny stuff? going on over here?
Could be. I mean, I'm sure there are connections. Now, Jacob, what? No, before I end, let me just clarify that there was no evidence pointing to Arthur Doyle's involvement
Exactly.
in
And
this
in
thing.
the end,
It was proven that Dawson. It was just Dawson. He
there was
did
a great
it.
book by Mark Miller,
Yeah.
Dr. Mark Miller, called Case Closed, The Piltdown Man, in which it was decisively
Proven that
it
was his
Dawson and
solo
nobody else.
adventure. Yeah.
The fun part is that Dawson, on his deathbed, believed that he had pulled off this awesome con, but he never got the
He died.
knighthood and
Yeah.
all those things. I mean, it's posterity that is vilified him, but he believed that he had pulled his con, and it's poor Woodward, as you said, who had to suffer ignominy in his
Yeah,
life.
but at least he was resting in peace. So whatever, that is another episode. Now, tell me what happened to Gupta after Talent exposed him.
So, in 1990, the Geological Society of India and Society for Scientific Values, which is an independent organization of scientists, they presented evidence of Gupta's misconduct to his parent university, Panjab University. He suspended in 1991, but shockingly reinstated in 1992 by a new vice chancellor. In 1993, the UGC, or the University Grants Commission, strips his department of that prestigious Center for Advanced Studies status. A 1994 inquiry by a retired judge finds Gupta guilty of data manipulation, plagiarism, and fabricating sites. But the university allows him to continue teaching. The Himalayan fossil hoax leaves a lasting scar. Indian paleontology, once on the cusp of global recognition, suffers a huge blow to its credibility. Decades of research are tainted, and scientists worldwide must scramble to correct the record. I mean, they had to literally retant, so they had to go through all of his articles, publish them in various other journals.
And imagine the number of apologies they must have had to issue.
It's like having to go through everybody's work over 30 years. Now, Gupta lived till the age of 80 and he passed away in 2022. He never faced any legal accountability. Now, the question is, he didn't commit an IPC level crime, I guess. But
wasn't it even far greater crime, because these crimes cannot be covered by the penal code of any country, but they have a far greater
yeah, I mean, you just
impact.
have massive reputational things. I mean, so for all said and done, he remained a professor at Panjab University. And of course, he was barred from holding any administrative posts, and his salary increments were stopped, but the pension continued, obviously. He moved away from teaching paleontology to environmental geology. That's really not his strong point. But he continued writing several books. He's written books on, I don't know, the environment and conservation, etc., etc.
How spectacular.
His PhDs and DSc, I mean, his fraud started all the way from the PhD, but they weren't resigned despite being based upon this fraudulent work. And the worst part was some of his co-authors, who were in this and who took all of his findings on faith, they had to face accusations, because the whole point was that Gupta is guilty, your co-authors are guilty too. So either everybody is guilty or nobody is guilty. And when they found that the co-authors had nothing to do, Gupta also somehow got away as being not guilty. But he suffered because, in one way, he did suffer because a scientist of that eminence and stature, you would have probably got like a couple of Padma Bhushans and Vibhushans. You would have been on a dozen committees, and he would be the authority on everything. But Gupta just disappeared. The very fact that he just went into obscurity means that everybody, the scientific community, had to shun him.
Yeah.
And there were other consequences for the field of geology too. I had, reported on this story of a scientist at the Wadia Institute of Himalayan Geology called Rafat Azmi. Now, Rafat Azmi had actually made a 1.6. He'd found a fossil which was 1.6 billion years old, and when he claimed it and dating it correctly, it was met with intense suspicion, because it was like, oh, this is fossils, this is from the same area as Gupta. And it took him years. It took until another, Stefan Bengston of the Swedish Museum of Natural History. Only when he made those finds again, and he, said that this was nothing fraudulent. And they actually named that fossil as Rafat Azmi Chitrakutensis after Azmi. So had all these
he had
terrible
poisoned the
consequences been
waters.
there, we would have probably not had to.
But Jacob, before actually we conclude this episode, tell me a little bit more about the importance of Gupta's claims that finding conodons. What exactly does it do in Himalaya? What is the significance?
So these are particular marine fossils. They are used as chronological markers of evolutionary time. I mean, if you find conodons at a particular height, depth, when you are doing, that you can either, at what point of time, certain layers, or certain layers of the Himalayas evolved. You can't find, it's the order in which you find fossils that matter.
So they are like the index fossils.
They are like index fossils. conodons particularly, and trilobites, because they show, I mean, you can't find something that shows tooths evolving before animals had soft skin or something like that, so it's the order that matters. Now, what he had done was that he found so many of these fossils all in the Himalayas, and it had completely messed up. I mean, paleontologists and stratigraphers always want stuff that's messed up because they like stuff which is new, which changes, received theories. And that is why he got the fame that he did. But now when you see that, this guy has just been literally planting stuff over there, it means that many of those theories are wrong. And it's very hard to find out which part of your statement was plausible, which
And
part
which
is
part?
complete made up.
Yeah, because you have to now sort of differentiate between all the frauds that he had plugged and
And there's a whole redundant
whatever truth. Now, what is common between Gupta and Dawson? Now, there are interesting parallels with Dawson. Both were knowledgeable in their fields and perhaps driven by their greed for status, decided to fake the path to glory. They knew exactly how to appeal to scientific authority, the honor code among scientists, and used it. While Gupta had to resign, he superannuated with full benefits and continued to teach, though not in his core disciplines. Were he the scientific authority that he hoped to be, he would have lauded over government committees, bagged a few Padma Awards, and would have got other post retirement uh, sinecures. His death in 2022 would have inspired tributes in the geological circles and obituaries in newspapers. But ultimately, as we have discovered, none of this ever happened. He passed away at 80 in relative obscurity. The internet has ensured that his name is welded together with the great Himalayan hoax. As we wrap up the story of Vishwajit Gupta, it is a cautionary tale about the fragility of trust in science and the importance of rigorous peer review. It's also a reminder that ambition unchecked can lead to spectacular falls. John Talon's courage in exposing the truth ensured that the Himalayan fossil hoax didn't stay buried, but it came at a cost to the entire field.
So, in closing, there is O. Bhargava, who a paleontologist and a close compatriot of Talon. He wrote his obituary when Talon died as recently as 2024 at a grand old age of 91. So I quote, "In the scientific world, not many may know John as a man, I guess as a person, but let's excuse that. I found him to be one of the finest human beings in this wide, crafty world, always willing to help as a scientist and also as a friend. He had a facile pen and an exceptional control of language. I had the benefit of getting several of her manuscripts edited by him. I witnessed his philosophical facet in many letters to me after the death of his son, Ross. With so many traits and expertise, I am tempted to coin the term omni-geologist to describe John. Persons like John Alfred Talon never die. His contributions to geology have made him immortal. Nevertheless, the world of paleontology and stratigraphy is poorer." So, with that, Shobna, we've had this super wild ride into the criminal world that sometimes exists in science.
Is science. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did like us, do send us feedback, and to do listen to us on wherever you catch podcasts. Also, share, subscribe, and talk about our uh, podcast to all your friends. That's all from us. It's goodbye from me, Shobna.
Goodbye from me, Jacob.